Crimson Desert is one of the most hyped games that's come around in a long time, but does it actually live up to that hype? Over the last few weeks of playing it for almost 80 hours, I've definitely had a lot of fun. The world is beautiful and massive, there's an insane amount of side content to explore, and there are tons of options for gear and combat abilities, as well as unique mechanics you can combine with them, offering a lot of potential for experimentation and finding what's most fun for you. But I also found a few specific things that some people will love, but others are going to find frustrating, and one in particular that I think will fall short of some people's expectations. So I'm going to break down my experience into 5 categories and give you a score in each so you can decide if Crimson Desert is a good fit for you. And we're going to start with world and exploration. This is definitely one of the game's strong points. I love a big open world with lots of biomes, settlements, and hidden areas to explore, and Crimson Desert delivers on all of that. But I'm also always wary that when the map gets too big, it can easily start to feel like there are areas that are just kind of empty with nothing really interesting to do. And there is some of that, but I was actually surprised at how well they filled in this absolutely massive map. Each region has a major settlement, and then there's lots of smaller villages and things like fishing docks, quarries, farms, and bandit camps spread all over in between. Plus, you've got lots of puzzles to discover and solve, and unique locations designed for cool side missions. On top of that, you've got just a crazy amount of different resources you can gather while exploring, like timber, ores, flowers, and even a bunch of different kinds of insects. And they're not just meaningless, you actually need those flowers and insects for some important gear crafting. I admit I went in a bit skeptical, but I was pleasantly surprised that it's actually pretty hard to find areas of the map that don't have at least something going on. Even something as simple as stumbling across a new exotic ore is a bit of a dopamine hit. You'll also run into a lot of wandering bandits and a fair number of NPCs that could use your help with something, though that's generally much more common around settlements. But there are still a couple of things I think could have been improved. First, there are some areas that you'll find that feel kind of empty. Not a lot, but you'll find some. And in any game, areas with a low density of interesting stuff to do are just less engaging. Usually you will find something interesting pretty quick though. What I actually found more problematic was the fact that a lot of what you come across are basic enemy encounters, like with bandits, and fighting these basic enemies starts to feel pretty repetitive after a while because there's not a whole lot of variety with them, and even when there is some variety, you can still just kind of mow them down. And there are a lot of them. Like, there will be some encounters where you have to fight literally hundreds of bandits, and that's just one camp. But if you're kitted right and you have enough food, it's not actually that challenging to take them all out, and the camp designs are usually pretty basic. So these encounters start to feel very samey. The other knock I have to give the world and exploration category is the fact that you kinda can't engage with it fully until you put quite a bit of time into progressing the main story to unlock certain mechanics. At a minimum, I'd say you need to focus on mainlining through chapter 5 or so, but there's even more to unlock through main missions after that. It's not that you can't go explore earlier, you can run off in a random direction in your first hour if you want, but it's just that you're gonna run into a lot of stuff that you're either not geared up for, you just don't have the mechanic unlocked for, or you just simply won't have had enough time to wrap your head around the game's systems and how everything works. Now, a lot of games require you to progress the main story a bit before you can branch off, but the thing with Crimson Desert is you've got to put a lot of time in before you've got your feet under you. Like, I kid you not, you should plan on putting in at least 30 to 40 hours before you start to feel like you're getting your head wrapped around it. And I can guarantee there will still be quite a bit for you to figure out after that. And I'm not talking about content to do, but literally how the game's systems and mechanics work. Completing all the content in the game will probably take at least 150 hours, if not over 200. I certainly still have a ton to do after about 80. Now, that might sound great to you if you're looking for a massive game to get lost in, but the point I'm trying to make is that it's going to take you at least a few dozen hours before you feel like you can really start engaging with the game fully. And if you're the type of player that just wants to be thrown into a big awesome world with no hand-holding, well, you're gonna have to go through a fair amount of basic tutorials via main quests before you can really go forge your own path. Still, Pywell is awesome to explore, and then the network of Abyss Islands floating overhead literally adds a whole nother dimension to the map. And there's just a ton of cool side content to do, so overall, World and Exploration gets an 8.5 out of 10 from me. I mentioned how combat can start to feel kind of repetitive though, and that's due to a bit more than just having a lot of bandits all over. over. Now, I've had a lot of fun with the combat system. It's fast-paced, there's lots of really cool and powerful feeling combos, you've got unique mechanics like picking up logs with one of Cliff's spirit abilities so you can slam them down on enemies, and there's a solid number of different weapon and gear options for you to discover and play with. And there are still aspects I haven't fully experimented with. It's also worth reiterating from my preview video that this game is not a Souls-like. You're rewarded for playing faster and more aggressively, which I personally prefer. But the weaker parts of the combat system are, 1, the fact that most basic enemies can just be mowed down with pretty basic attacks once you know a few simple combos and have some decent gear, and 2, that a lot of boss encounters can be very tedious and difficult when you don't know the trick to beating them. But then once you figure it out, in a lot of cases they become really easy. Basically, you should expect to die to a boss a bunch of times until you experiment enough to figure out the trick or look up a guide that tells you, and then you'll have no problem. This is one of the things that will be divisive. Some people will find it super frustrating banging their head against the wall trying to beat a particular boss over and over, while others will enjoy the challenge of experimenting to figure out the trick that makes it easy. You should also know that the combat in this game, even against basic enemies, involves a lot of healing. You are going to take a lot of damage because basic enemies are almost always in big groups and they will swarm you. Sometimes you have to fight your way through literally hundreds of enemies for an encounter, so you will need to heal a lot. Stacking dozens of healing items is kind of the meta, at least until you get some better gear and unlock a lot of skills. But again, the combat against regular enemies isn't particularly tough. You don't have to become really skilled, it's just a matter of staying alive and choosing which skills and gear you find the most fun for mowing them all down. But the fact that you have a bunch of options for doing that is what I found the most fun about the combat system. Even though you're often mowing down basic enemies, Cliff and the other characters have a bunch of really cool skills that make you feel really powerful. And the mix of different weapons, abyss cores that let you customize your build, and the magic abilities you can weave into combat create a system that feels unique and fun, even if it often feels like you can just demolish an entire army alone. Well, I say feels like, you literally do that on a regular basis. I give combat and gear a 7.5 out of 10. But what about narrative, the story, and characters? I know a lot of people are wondering how good this is. Well, to be perfectly honest, narrative is not Crimson Desert's strong point. Especially if you're a fan of games like Horizon, The Witcher, Expedition 33, The Last of Us, Cyberpunk, or Red Dead Redemption, particularly for their stories and characters, you're not going to find that level of storytelling here. It's just not the focus of Crimson Desert. Its strengths are exploration of a massive and beautiful open world, experimentation with combat and puzzles, and discovering cool stuff like a unique piece of gear or a really unique side boss in a cool location. It does have a story, and there's an overall world narrative going on, and there are cutscenes to drive important narrative moments, but it's just a serviceable story. I certainly wouldn't call it bad, but I also certainly wouldn't call it great. It's pretty much just an average story with pretty average characters. This is another point I know will be divisive, and it's also where I think some people probably had their hopes too high. I don't think PearlAbyss was misleading with their marketing, but when they didn't show you much about the story in the trailers, that was because, well, it's just not the game's strong point. The thing is, I think this might actually also be a problem for a player who doesn't care about story, because if you're the type of person who's more excited about exploring and experimenting, well, like I said before, you kind of need to mainline the story for a while before you can really do that to its fullest extent, and you're going to be forced to watch a bunch of cutscenes. You can fast forward them, but you can't actually skip them. So I give narrative a 5 out of 10. It's just average. But if you do want a stronger narrative, the silver lining is that there is actually some more interesting storytelling that goes on in side content, at least from a world narrative perspective. Basically, you can get into the backstory and lore a bit more by going off the beaten trail and doing side quests. And actually, side content is even stronger in other ways. Like I mentioned earlier, there are tons of puzzles to do all across the map and up in the abyss too, and these aren't just a bunch of repetitive instances. There's a really good amount of variety, and then there's a bunch of places you'll stumble across something going on that starts up a new side mission that's just really cool. I don't want to spoil them, but I've found some of the most interesting locations, coolest bosses, and best gear by doing side content, which is exactly what I want. The one major weakness of side content for me is that there's also a lot of it that's just doing really simple fetch quest type tasks for minor NPCs. The completionist in me gets a little bit frustrated with that when there's already so much to do in this game, but more importantly, some of those simple side missions are actually kind of required to, for example, get yourself more inventory space. So 7.5 for me on side content. And then we've got graphics and performance. PearlAbyss's Black Space engine keeps Crimson Desert running surprisingly smoothly. Of course, the Digital Foundry guys have all the detailed breakdown stuff if you want to get into that, but overall, I was impressed I could get a solid 70 to 100 FPS running the game at 4K DLSS quality mode on a 4090 and 7800 X3D. I left all the settings on cinematic and just turned off ray reconstruction and knocked down the lighting quality setting from max to cinematic. Those two are a massive performance hit, but I didn't really feel like I was missing much by adjusting them. The more noticeable issues I experienced were things like really distracting flickery lighting in patches of vegetation and things like flowers and moss just popping into existence around Cliff as I ran around. Pretty minor stuff, but still kind of distracting. And I did also experience some boss fights where frame rate took a massive hit, like extended dips down into the 30s or so. Of course, I've been playing on pre-release drivers, so that sort of thing should improve, but that's what I have to judge it on, so 8 out of 10 on performance. Surprisingly solid with just a few rough spots. If you want to average up all my scores, that's a 7.3, but I really think it's more useful to go by the category scores. If narrative is really important to you, just know that that's not Crimson Desert's strength. But if you're looking for a massive world you can get lost in and combat and gameplay systems that give you lots to experiment with and discover on your own, then Crimson Desert is probably a great game for you. And if you're diving in, then you're definitely going to want to check out my essential tips in this video right here once it's live. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you over there in just a second.